So good. Let's start with this. I mean, I've had a kind of deep dive into your career. It's quite something, I have to say. I wasn't fully aware, I have to confess, of just how much shit you've done. Uh, it's quite a lot.
Busy. Yes.
I put this is my notes, and it's completely
Oh my. Okay.
uh, and it's pretty impressive stuff. Will you stop zipping that?
Sorry.
Sorry, mate. We're doing a sound installation at the Venice Art Biennale, and we're just packing up currently. So if you hear any strange noises, that's my sister.
That sounds cool too.
Okay. Let's start with how you got into all this, and I suppose growing up in New Jersey and all that stuff.
Well, sure. I mean, there was kind of a confluence of things that I just liked as a kid. I was not into sports. I liked music. I liked electronics, um, recordings. I always had a fascination for phonographs and records and that sort of stuff. And it was very well encouraged by my family. And also, I had a grandfather who was a big influence on me, who was a leading edge technology person. I mean, he was involved in very high levels in government research between the world wars. He ended up running one of the major laboratories for the U.S. Navy Department
Oh,
research, and that plugged him into Bell Laboratories and many of the other R&D things. So we got along famously. I mean, he had been a science club member in the early years of the 20th century and early radio adopter. He was always getting the latest toys. He had the first television when they became a thing. And one of the things that he had when I was really little was a really semi-pro half-track mono tape machine.
my God.
And so that was mostly so they could, because I was the first grandchild, so they could track me learning to talk. But by the time I was about 3 or 4, I was operating the thing just because
No.
the lights and the buttons and the whirling stuff. And he eventually gifted it to me right around the same time that the Beatles hit. So I had a pretty good, solid, high fidelity recording device, monophonic, but it was too long before I made a jump into 2 tracks and stereo and overdubbing. So there's that part. And then there's the music part. Actually, same thing that those grandparents were big supporters of opera. I wasn't that big a fan of opera, but they were always dragging me off to. They were supporters of a student opera company in New York. They were New Yorkers. Both of my grandparents had been born in Manhattan, and so I had this very close connection. New Jersey's really a commuting suburb of New York. So there was always the museums and the arts and other things that I was being exposed to, which was great. Um, one of the big ironies of all this was that later, this opera company that they were so supportive of, one of their student candidates turned out to be Hillel Crystal, who later became Hilly Crystal and opened CBGB's.
Oh no.
Now,
Wow.
got this thing where I may have seen Hilly as an opera student performance at one of their luncheons as a kid without ever making the connection. We never we got to know each other a bit later during the 70s, but I never asked him about that. And unfortunately now he's gone.
Oh.
But these threads were in there. So I had all of that. And of course that grandfather was highly focused on electronics. He had several patents. And as a kid, we used to build kits together, Heath kits and hi-fi stuff.
Lucky person out of in this background.
Yeah, so it was just there, and then when the move into electronic music was starting to happen, particularly after things oscillators and all of that started happening, he was there for me to go to as a resource, and as an experienced graduate level electrical engineer, and didn't
Wow.
like rock. That was the other thing. So we kind of diverged on that, but I did have all of that. I mean, ironically, just let me see if it's over here because I did another talk for NAM,
and I just want to sync this little device to store it out.
Oh, I must have put it back. I had a little oscillator, which was a little oscillator kit that I got when I was in 5th grade, I think, from him. And we went about messing with it, changing the capacitor, changing the resistor. It was just 2 transistors and changing frequencies, changing waveforms a little bit.
Wow,
So that was my introduction to that.
crikey. Funnily enough, I just did a talk with Brian Hodgson from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, and his background is quite similar to yours. His dad was in the RAF. His dad used to bring bits of electronic equipment back, and he used to mess around with it when he was young, and so he grew to love kind of technology as toys when he was quite young, and I think this is quite an interesting thread.
It probably is. I mean, I don't want to dismiss him. My other grandfather was a complete sports fanatic. Every time I would be in the car with him, he'd have a baseball game on or a football game or something. And it just did not resonate with me whatsoever. Lovely guy, really, family relationship was wonderful, but something genetically was just a little differently put together. So,
in terms of your musical training, how did that develop then?
well, there was the obligatory music lessons because every properly brought up, young child in the American suburbs was supposed to at least get some passing familiarity with an instrument. And we had a couple of options. The schools offered free private lessons, and then in hopes of recruiting students into the school orchestras. So 3rd grade, I was about 7 years old, and the options were either trumpet, which my father played, not well, but interestingly, and violin, which my mother was actually quite good as a child herself, and we still had those instruments. I couldn't really play the trumpet because I had a terrible overbite and was going to need orthodontic work. So I opted for the violin, and that's where I learned to read music and play, starting with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and moved on to little Brahms pieces. I did that for 2 years, and eventually, about 2 years later, we got a piano in the house and switched over to piano lessons, kind of left the violin in the dust. And stayed with that again in private lessons. And it was a little boring. I wasn't all that excited until then again, the Beatles were the pivotal thing right around the time they made that huge American breakthrough. And I got a folio of some of the Lennon McCartney songs. There might have been a George Harrison song in there, in sheet music. And that I could sit down and I could play and I could have fun with it. And then all kinds of other things grew out of that. I was learning pieces like the Goldfinger theme from James Bond film.
Come on, John Barry,
Yep, John Barry. And I love John Barry's arrangements. And I started really delving into the soundtrack albums. I mean, I was a big Bond fan anyway, but there was something just about his orchestrations. If it was in fact him doing the orchestrations, they were just wonderful. I just heard some of the resonances of that later in some of the Jack Nietzsche's arrangements that were done.
Jack Nietzsche. Berlin, wasn't it? He did
Yep.
Berlin, I believe.
He had a solo orchestral album.
Really? I've never heard.
In 70. It's probably in my vinyl collection somewhere.
Right. I've got to look that up.
So it went to another, but then the electronics and the recording was always an overlay in that.
Yeah. I forgot to mention at the start, thank you for doing this, by the way.
No, my pleasure. I mean, I've been aware of you and your career for, many years, and I was kind of eyeing well, you're a little bit younger, but it was sort of the half generation next from the Gabriel era people.
There are some similarities in our approach. I mean, I'm not the main dissimilarity is that I'm not musically trained at all. I don't have I can't read or write music. I picked up a bit, obviously, over the years, but
it's not that hard, really. It's not like brain surgery.
It seems like brain surgery to me, but nevertheless, it's not stopped me doing what I do, and I think the most important thing for people is, and certainly when I'm encouraging young people is believe in your ear and your ability to absorb musical information and reproduce it, really. I suppose, is much more important than any kind of formal training.
I
Um,
think so. There's a certain gut level of when you know it's right or it's not right. And I find that some of the because I never did do conservatory training. I mean, I had the private lessons that got me so far, but I was really a terrible student. And once I discovered rock and roll, I wanted to go off things my way. And I was very fortunate that my piano teacher, who I stayed with private lessons for quite a while, was quite accommodating, but it was really clear that I was never going to be a classical pianist or anything like that. I mean, I wanted to have a band. I wanted
yeah.
all the things that
Of
were was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, yeah. So, what was your first synthesizer? When did you buy that?
Well, I mean, the first real one that I bought was Minimoog, but
Right.
I had been building them before that,
Right.
including for other people. So,
Wow.
because I didn't have the money by the time I got off to college, I had enough electronics chops. And even there was a debate about whether I was going to do a major in electrical engineering or something else. And I opted for something else, but I still took some of the courses. So I've got college level background in computers and some engineering. And then again, some of it's not terribly difficult. It got easier to become a kind of dilettante, self-taught electrical engineer, particularly after the vacuum tube era.
I prefer autodidact, I think.
Yeah, that could be too.
Yeah. Um,
Well, when I was in college, and I mean, I was taking all my appropriate college courses, and some of the computer science was real formal, but I kind of had a gap in some of my solid state electronics design work, and I got a very inexpensive self-teaching course from Texas Instruments that put out. This was in the early 70s. And I kind of just went through that, and that helped me fill in some of the gaps. And later, as digital electronics was coming in, that was mostly self-taught book learning.
okay. And did in America, I presume they did. In the UK they had some synthesizer kits that you could buy in the local, electronic stores. Did they have that in America then?
They did. There was one company which I later became good friends with the founder, Paya, PAIA Electronic, and they were out in Oklahoma. And they were making very inexpensive, where a Moog oscillator might be several $100s. Their modular oscillator was $29 as a kit.
Wow.
The problem was it wasn't very stable. It wasn't very accurate. It wasn't even, they were logarithmic rather than linear voltage controls. So you couldn't really interface them with things like Moog modules.
Right.
But I had some of theirs just more for filters and envelope followers and a few of those which I could build, and they were very easy to modify.
Right.
Once you had understood the circuit board, their instruction manual was great because not only did it say, put resistor and these are the color bands in these holes, but when you were all done, they explained the theory of how it works. And it was a very good educational kit. So I had augmented some of the things that I'd done, but what I was building were, odd little um, banks of oscillators, things that would do strange preset sounds. And I wasn't quite sure where I was going with it, but I was commissioned very early on when I was still a student by Rick Wakeman to build him one of what I had built for myself
How did you meet Rick Wakeman?
through doing college radio interviews. I knew
Wow.
that I was kind of a music obsessive, again, going back to the mid 60s, what we called here in the States, the British invasion.
Yeah.
Kind of from the time the Beatles hit these shores and then all the follow-on bands that came. And it was a really seismic shock for the culture. It was, the culturally looking back on it, it was about 12 weeks after the Kennedy assassination was when the Beatles had the biggest television audience in history. And there was a palpable shift of the earth on its axis going back to school the Monday after that
Wow.
relevant show. It never really changed again. So what where was I going with that thought? It was
I think you were talking about Rick Wakeman.
yeah, oh, of course. With Rick Wakeman, what had happened was after that Beatles thing, I just said, I want to do that. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I wanted to be a performer, a producer, or a writer, and a tape op, an engineer, but I wanted some part of that life. And when I went to college, where theoretically I was in a pre-law program, I was, on the track to be a lawyer, which was a family business that I would have been able to step into. But in my heart of hearts, I went, I still want to do that. I still want to be in recording studios. I still want something to do with that. The surest path to do that, already having been a knowledgeable music obsessive, was to get into college radio. Most university colleges had a radio station. And if you learned how to work the system, you realized that the record labels interfaced with you through the promotion departments. They usually had younger, newly hired employees were pitching records, and you could kind of reach back up the chain of command. So Yes was a band that I had discovered on a family trip to the UK in the summer of 1969 when they first came out. Kept an eye on them, and then over the next 2 years, a good buddy of mine who's still active in the music business, a college friend, we kind of took over the radio station. And we called Atlantic Records when we saw Yes was coming on the road and they were promoting Fragile. They were not a very well-known band. They were an opening act. They were playing very, very small halls. And we said, we really like this act, and we want to interview them for our radio station. And so we did, but it turned out in the conversation with Rick, who was fairly new in the band at that point, I said, somewhere in the conversation dropped, oh, I do synthesizers too. And he had his mini Moog. He was already becoming somewhat of a name in that. And we got talking, and right then and there, he said, well, I want one of those. So whatever it is you're building, build me one.
That's quite a break, isn't it? Really, you made your own look, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually, we've got to be friends, and we still exchange emails regularly. I mean,
Yeah, he's a nice guy, isn't he? Yeah, I've met him a couple of times. He's a sweetheart.
So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things connected through that, because through their management, phone calls were later made when I was trying to make my way into the business, that were extremely helpful. A lot of connections, came
How it
together.
works. All the
Very
listeners out there, if you want to get into this shit, it's all about the connections, right?
Did the same thing with Genesis, with the same radio station, about 18 months later.
Really? Which album was that at that time? That must have been Selling England by the Pound or something like that.
It was Nursery Crime.
Nursery Crime, even before that, yeah.
Yeah. And they were on a label. They had a distribution deal on a label in the States, which was the same one that did a lot of bubblegum music. I don't know what the backstory to that was, but there were some of these groups like the Archies and the 1910 Gum Company. And they were distributing it through that channel. But it was the same thing. He made a phone call from the college radio station, said, well, we see you've got a baby band, and they're playing some very small halls. And they were playing a 400-seater at Princeton University, which was fairly nearby. And got the interview, and I thought, oh, great, maybe I can meet Tony Banks and sell him on one of my things. Maybe I'll be a synthesizer designer. Who knows? And he wasn't that interested. But his conversation, but that's when I first met Peter Gabriel.
Who is a genius and a lovely man.
Yeah. So there were a lot of threads that were kind of pushing us to end up working together a couple of years later.
Yeah.
But that was sort of my entree into the business, and by then I was earning a little more money. I was able to afford the first mini Moog, and start fleshing it out with other devices.
Yeah. Wow. I'm dodging around the timeline a little here, so
Okay,
bear with
jump
me.
wherever you want. And if I'm talking too much, slow me down.
Hey, I get told off for talking too much, so I'm quite happy when somebody else talks. I'm such an enormous fan of Peter Gabriel. I mean, I actually asked him to be on the podcast, and incredibly, I met him a few times, he incredibly politely declined, which is gutting. But anyway, um, but I was just re-listening to Peter Gabriel 3 that you worked on, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
There is some fantastic work that you did on that, I have to say.
Inside that album for months.
Well, I mean, No Self-Control, what a track that is. And, you know, obviously Games Without Frontiers, but Intruder. And, I mean, I'm listening back to it now. This is 40 years old, more than 40 years old.
Yeah.
And it just sounds contemporary. I mean, particularly the stuff that if we look at it as a big cake, all the ingredient that you were putting into that cake was really made it special, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank
No, but that's not. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. I didn't know who you were at that time. I just knew that album had a special sound. At that point, did you have the Fairlight? Is that
the Fairlight came in? I encountered the Fairlight at the power station just before we started. In fact, they may have been cutting tracks already before I had flown over to the UK. But Peter Vogel, who was one of the co-developers, was on a tour pitching this new instrument, and he had brought it to Power Station Studios. That was Tony Bon Jovi's studios, and they were relatively new at that point in New York, but I had done a number of sessions there, and I knew people on staff. So, I mean, it was like, Tony, a guy named Bob Walters, who had come from another studio called Media Sound, where I had mixed my first album. Bob Clear Mountain had also jumped from Media Sound to Power Station. So I got a call. I think it might have even been Tony Levin, who had been on a session there. And they said something about, there's this Aussie guy here, and he's got this weird instrument. It says it's a synthesizer, but it's got a computer screen and a light band. And I had actually read a little bit about it because I'd been working as the sort of artist, creative outsider at Bell Laboratories for
really
almost 4 years at that point.
Wow.
And so we were kind of aware. We at Bell, the technology was well beyond the Fairlight. And, but we were kind of looking over our shoulders in a sense to see, well, what's happening out there, mostly at other institutions like at Stanford or in EarCam and some of the others. But also the microprocessor technology was moving so quickly. It was clear that there was going to be a consumer or a prosumer level of some of this pretty soon. And Fairlight was the first one that I had become aware of. So had a wonderful demo with Peter Vogel, and he was heading to London. I think he was meeting Seventh Wave. They were going to see it, and I think he was going to Argent's or something.
Yeah.
We were looking for distributors. So I gave him the number at Ashram House, which was the studio, pre-Peter studio. I'm getting dinged in here. I'm sorry about that.
Right.
And gave him the phone number, and he called, and I said, yeah, bring it out. So we had it for maybe just 2 days while he was there at before he had to get back to London. And he was traveling around the world. He had stops in a number of places, but we got a lot of work out of it very quickly. Mm-hmm. So you'll hear the Fairlight on that album, but most of it was literally on in a matter of a couple of several hour sessions.
Is that right? So was it used on those tracks I mentioned?
Oh yeah,
Intruder, No Self. It sounds like it was, and I never heard anything like it before. So it mystified me.
Yeah. No, it was used more, I know, like on the Electronically sounding orchestra on the start, which is before I don't remember. Right. That was all Fairlight. Right. And there were various percussion things done. I've got photos of a lot of this. I know there's one with a milk crate, Peter, and bottles and a crowbar, smashing them with a Shure 57 being held right up to it, creating percussive things that could used. So it ended up being used more like that because things like No Self-Control were fairly conventional old studio tricks, flipping the tape, reverse echoes. And that's a classic example, by the way, of a track that started out as a full-on loud big band, almost jazz thing, and was built through subtraction.
Really?
It's on there. If you ever heard the original track, you can hear what ended up in the final thing buried in the cacophony.
Wow.
Same thing with Warmer Life. That one also started out as a huge multiplayer band. I mean, Morris Pert is on it. There are saxes, multiple drums, big Phil Collins drums. And then when you get to the final part of it, it's just a tiny little bit. At the very end, you can hear a bandwidth limited version of some of the big things creeping around on the horizon.
Really? So that was Steve Lillywhite, right? And who else?
Steve Lillywhite, Hugh Padgham.
Hugh Padgham, that's right.
Peter got to be the catalyst on this one more than albums 1 and 2.
Right.
So
I think I was in awe of his because he used to work at the Townhouse where I used to record with at that point, and I was in awe of their sounds they were getting, particularly the drum sounds, obviously, and all that sort of
terrific. And that brave running.
Wow. I mean, it's blowing my mind, all this, because I grew. This was my musical education, and just before I started becoming a professional musician, and well, some of it was after.
Yeah,
but
overlap.
We overlap, yeah. But it was such an amazing. The sound of that, and obviously things like Low End Heroes were a big influence on us as well, and those sort of things. But there was a real creative kind of maelstrom happening round about 78 to 82, I think, which we were riding that particular wave. I wouldn't claim to have invented anything during that period, but and I think you guys were a big part of what inspired me as well.
Good. To help.
So Kate Bush, tell me about that experience for you.
Oh, well, it was a wonderful experience in a number of ways. It was very, very short. It probably gets over credited in my career. But Kate and Peter had been working together on a number of things, both television and recording. And she was in on the sessions for on the third album. She's all over Games Without Frontiers and No Self-Control, a bunch of things. They were wonderful sessions. She's absolutely lovely person. And she was sort of enamored by some of the electronics and the other experimental things we were doing. So she was working at Abbey Road. And for me, that was kind of, a mecca, especially if she was in Studio 2. So
I've recorded in there. It's an amazing space.
It's just, there's a vibe thing. There's, going to the commissary to eat lunch. And I really, she asked if I would be interested. I certainly was. And she just had a few things. And I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't remember which tracks we ended up.
I think you did Breathing.
Yeah, Breathing was definitely one. There might have been a few others, but I don't know whether everything made it to the album. It's not like
right.
Or any
Well,
album. But, she was absolutely charming. I was thrilled to be working at Abbey Road. That was my first time in there, and hopefully I brought something to the recording. So it was.
Oh my God! Well, Breathing. So I have my kind of production identity is called British Electric Foundation, and I did an album a few years ago, and Breathing was one of the tracks I did a cover version of, with Andy Bell singing the lead. And so I didn't know you were involved in that. Obviously, at that time, I'd not looked into it, and now I've just listened back to it again, and I'm going, "There's some great stuff on there, man." I'm respect. That's all.
There were a lot those kinds of sessions that I was doing over those years. I mean, that showed up with all different kinds of artists. A couple of days with Blue Oyster Cult or singers like Ian Lloyd. There were many, many recordings where Usually it was the producers would bring me in, but some of them turned into long-standing, friend relationships.
You're a very obviously you're a very agreeable kind of chap. I try to be that, but I fail sometimes.
Right, but it's not always successful.
Yeah,
So
no, exactly.
sometimes it's just not a good fit.
Yeah, yeah. And the stuff you did on H2O with Hall and Oates, that's happening. I mean, that sounds fresh now to me. I honestly, it's a thing of beauty. And so tell me about working with those guys, because I've got maximum respect for their songwriting.
Oh, good. Well, that was probably, you probably know a little bit about this area of the States. The States are smaller here on the East Coast, the former colonies.
Yeah.
And Pennsylvania, which is very close. New Jersey's quite small.
Yeah.
Between New York and Philadelphia. And I went to college out in Pennsylvania. So I ended up having kind of a second musical scene, or even a third. There was a New York vibe. There was the New Jersey one, which was emerging, which would become the E Street Band and Bon Jovi and other bands like that. And then there was a whole scene in Philadelphia, which was people like Todd Rundgren were
I
becoming.
love Todd Rundgren. Did you work with him?
Yeah, a number of different. We've overlapped in so many ways over the years, and in fact, my first meeting with Hall and Oates as a professional was when they were doing War Babies at Todd's Secret Sound Studio.
Wow.
And I think that was the night I met Tommy Mottola too. So it was he was managing them at the time, Hall and Oates. Yeah, anyway, the whole Philadelphia scene, I think Daryl and I never could nail it down, but I think he was in a band called Gulliver before splitting off. I think Gulliver played at my college at Subway, but they had played there, and I think I went. He didn't remember if he was in the band or not at that point, but there was a lot of that kind of stuff. Apparently Springsteen's one of his earlier bands played a fraternity party at the college back before they were anything at all.
Wow. So that particular Hall and Oates album, H2O, is it sounds very contemporary now to me. I mean, it's quite minimalist in some respects. And
That's I think a big part of it is there was Peter is very good at that once he was allowed to operate on his own. There were a couple of principles. One was no middle ground. If something doesn't have value and either extremely loud, extremely soft, if it doesn't make a point, it's like a wasted word. So
I love that.
It becomes wordy prose. So just get it out of there. It's got to justify itself. And the other was try not to follow the trend du jour. What's this hip sound for this year, or the particular effect. Now, sometimes that boomerangs on you because things like the so-called Phil Collins drum sound, which was not like anything else with Peter when it first made its appearance, and then later with Phil and Genesis, became a thing. So then it became a sound du jour, but that was accidental. But with Hall and Oates, and to some extent, the work that I did with Foreigner on two albums with them, and a lot of the Jim Steinman work that I did. That's what.
Oh my God! Tell me about Jim Steinman. Jesus.
Oh, I'm so sorry he's gone. He was one of my favorite literary characters. They were the most indulgent, time-wasting sessions that were. He could spin tales and stories, and he was just the kind of guy you want to be hanging around with, all the time. So they were expensive sessions. It didn't matter who the artist was, whether it was Meatloaf or Bonnie Tyler or Barbara Streisand or whoever. The budgets were huge, and he found a way to spend it all. And we'd start late because he would tend to sleep all day, so we wouldn't even start until the evening, and we'd go through the night. In fact, my goal when we were recording in New York was to try to get out of Manhattan before the morning rush hour started. So I wanted to be on my way home by about 5 or 6 a.m. so I didn't get caught in traffic. But he was just really fabulous. He really was a theater person,
Right.
and the whole Stormy and Meatloaf thing had grown out of that. And they were much more a part of the Reno Sweeney cabaret theater circuit in New York than
I had no idea about this. This is all news to me. I mean, it makes sense. Completely. Except he did theatrical, right? So
yeah, he was and when he was in college, he was a playwright, and I suppose he was writing short stories and things, although I'm not sure if any of them were published. But his goal was to work in theater, write for Broadway. He wanted to be, well, he ended up working with Joseph Papp, I think, on some things. I think he wanted to be a Stephen Sondheim. And
could be.
it could have been, and then later he did work with Andrew Lloyd Webber. They had a few
Right.
collaborations. So he got to do that, but what really launched it was the Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell album.
Great album. Just great. No coincidence it sold as many as it did.
No. And I had worked on that in an engineering capacity.
Is that right?
Because, well, Todd Rundgren had started producing it, and then Todd left the project about, I don't know, 80% of the way, 75% of the way through, and it came to the studio that I recorded in, and where I was becoming much more integrated into the studio itself. And it was an all hands on deck job to try and finish that album. So I was drafted for things. And then I worked on the next one as a musician, because on synths,
You are a box of tricks, I think.
it's just like, do you know the film Zelig?
I do.
The characters
You know what?
everywhere.
I referenced Zelig yesterday to someone. I said, I'm like Zelig. I'm somewhere in the really, really in the rosette of public consciousness, but I'm pretty much there a lot of the time in the UK. So, yeah, anyway.
I'm kind of there. I mean, I've been at a lot of the, parts of lots of these sessions, and they've been so varied. That's the nice thing about it. And yet at the core, I've always, my, I don't know, my main focus, which I always come back to and back to where I am now, is the more pure electronics, the Wendy Carlos world, Laurie Spiegel.
Oh my God. Wendy Carlos is my all-time hero, bar none. That's it. And when I read in something one of your interviews that you were friends with her, I actually nearly dropped my my cup of tea because I've been trying to find a way to. She's really reclusive, right? So
Reclusive, she's not going to do this. I don't want to disappoint you, but she just will not. She's extremely, she scurries back into the privacy of the wonderful world that she has built for herself. But she's been burned, she was a pioneer in areas other than music, and a very sensitive and extremely empathetic individual. And she got hurt, by the crudeness of the culture around us, and she just doesn't want to expose herself to that. And
I don't blame her. I don't blame her at all. But anyway, pass the message on. I'm an amazing fan, and I just love her work. And whether or not I ever get to meet her or talk to her, is neither here nor there. I just want her to know that her approach to music was a large influence on the way that we developed the early Human League, and I still listen to her soundtrack to Clockwork Orange all the time. I try and get all the rarities. I even buy stuff off her website. I bought the Secrets of Synthesis album, which is just awesome, by the way. Her soundtrack to Tron.
Well, one of the highlights for my career was being in the Switched on Bach Ensemble, the only live performance.
Oh, really?
And it was 8 of us that were pulled together to play it live for the Bach at the Beacon, which was a sponsored Bach it's like a festival over a 2-day period. Ettore Strada, who was a conductor and had been part of the classical A&R department at Columbia, I believe, during the period when Switched on Bach was happening, and a champion of Wendy's. He was the one that put us together. And then Wendy invited a select group to become the performers. And I was the only one, I think, of the whole bunch who was not conservatory trained, which was frightening. And as I pointed out to a couple of people, I had about 3 months to learn my parts, and the third Brandenburg almost killed. So,
I bet. That's some.
but I did okay. I did fine. I mean, but it was so much more difficult than playing, live
Oh,
Gabriel
absolutely.
or a Nektar concert.
Wow. I mean, I am. I didn't know that had happened, so I'm in awe of that. I've actually been fortunate enough to play with the Moog Ensemble in the UK, which is Will Gregory from Goldfrapp and Adrian Utley from Portishead. They put together a similar ensemble, all electronic, and I performed Escape from New York with them, which was just fantastic live in 3D sound at the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, and I was I was an enormous amount of pleasure. But I can't tell you if it's like if Wendy Carlos had never existed, I think my life would have been entirely different. That's how important. I'm really deadly serious. She's my all-time synth hero. Spot on.
Well, Wendy set the bar early on, and knowing her background and work in graduate school at Columbia, Princeton, electronic music, and work with Yusashevsky and all the others, even though she was rebelling against a lot of that.
Yeah.
She had her own, there'll be some things to read about that sometime in the near future. She's working on memoirs right now.
Oh, well,
But don't know when that's going to be done, but I've been kind of extracting things there to help her along with that. I'm playing a very small role on it. But regardless, her work in professional recording at Gotham Audio and the fact that she was a disc cutter, a crackerjack editor, as well as a composer, she had certain audio and acoustic standards that were incredibly high. And she applied those along with, the people she was working with on Switched on Bach, and Rachel Elkind in particular, who was kind of her producer, right-hand woman. And
I am so thrilled with all that. Yeah. So I they're timeless piece of work to me. So let's talk about other synthesis, because we're both fans of electronic music. I mean, at the same time I fell in love with Wendy. I fell in love in a different way with Isaiah Tomita, and the more expressionist, shall we say, odd kind of interpretations, particularly of Debussy and all that stuff, I thought was opened my eyes a lot. And whereas I think that Wendy's approach is more, she understands the tonalities of different orchestral components, and she can interestingly and accurately replace their functionality within a spectrum. Whereas Isaiah Tomita is just bonkers, right? So
well, yeah, I found it sometimes comical.
yeah,
And I was never sure, and I never met him to ask him, but I was never able to quite get a handle on, was that because you intended it to be funny or silly, or was that just the best you could do? Was that where your creative mind went? I think one of the things that, and Wendy and I have discussed this, in some of the electronic music composers, particularly the academic world, very few of them came from an electronics or technological background. Wendy, as you probably know, actually has an undergraduate degree in physics.
Yeah.
And so she's thoroughly versed in what the capabilities of the equipment is. But many of the people that had trained in 12-tone or modernistic, avant-garde, classical, post-tonal music, seemed to be enamored with just any kind of old crap sound that wasn't part of their vocabulary. And they would fall in love with it, where I felt Wendy, and I tried to develop my own sensitivities that way, that there is a palette, there's a spectrum, there is a set of colors that you want to use, both in arrangement and in the sounds that you're making. And my contribution to the little theory is that the instruments of the traditional symphonic orchestra that evolved over the centuries from, from the Middle Ages onward, as that tradition began to evolve, instruments were kind of tossed out on their ass at different points because they didn't fulfill the needs of the larger tonality. And so the classes of sounds that we ended up with just before the electronic era started, maybe with the last edition being the honking reeds of saxophones,
Yeah.
were there was a kind of Darwinism involved in the evolution of which were the fittest instruments to be fit together into these jigsaw puzzles. And try not to get distracted by the odd goofy things. And that's where Tomita kind of, for me, in a sense, went off the rails. The Firebird is something that I try to live inside, and listening to parts of his interpretation of it. And I'm not slagging him off. It's just like, I wouldn't do that. That wouldn't
It's
be
interesting. It did work for certain things, I think. It worked for the more beautiful and elegiac stuff. It's when it started going the Gollywog's cakewalk and all that stuff didn't really work.
And that's supposed to be a little silly. So, some of the ways it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. What about Tonto's Expanded Mod Band? Do you know those guys?
Yeah, actually had met both of them, didn't know them well at all, but it was a different approach. I mean, I was always looking, again, maybe you and I share this. Wendy kind of set the standards in a way because I was looking at composed music, even if it was tonal color pieces like her piece Time Steps.
Yeah, Time Steps, the best ever.
Yeah, but there's a certain narrative that runs through it. It may not be a tradition that comes directly out of Bach and Beethoven to Stravinsky, but there's something there. You follow the storyline. And a lot of the early sequence based and other electronic artists, I don't know quite what to call it, didn't always follow that. So that doesn't mean it's invalid. It just means it didn't resonate with me.
Let's talk about this is a good transition. Let's talk about this idea of resonating. To me, as an electronic music, or rather a writer and composer that uses electronic devices of various kinds, it's about narrative and emotional engagement, really. At its bottom line, it's not about isn't this amazing? What an amazing sound this can make. I'm not bothered. I know I can pretty much get to any sound that I can imagine nowadays.
Right. It's fun to do that every once in a while, but that's not the be all and
No, it's not the be all and end all. I think that the point is, I want it, and I'm sure you're the same, to have an emotional impact on the listener in some way, or at least paint a picture or paint a narrative.
It's communication. And then very much, I try to draw the parallels between graphic arts and another area we haven't talked about that I'm deeply involved in, which is architecture and historic.
Really? Tell me about that.
I've always just liked buildings and construction and architecture. And when I was, again, college level, I had an opportunity at some open elective time. So I took some of the introductory architecture courses, which were largely about the history of architecture, but there was some interdisciplinary engineering involved in it, about how structures stand up and how they're composed in a sense. And I started, even back then, seeing parallels between how the music arrangements are really a piece of architecture, and realizing you're architecting out a lot when you're designing a song and a piece. And sometimes you're moving from room to room. And do you want the room to be an entirely different room, or do you want it to share certain elements with the previous room along the timeline? So I ended up getting a bit of an education in that. And I never truly let that go. I was also studying history. And in the last couple of decades, mostly because I just in local government, I didn't like some of the changes that were going on. So I sort of threw myself into saving a couple of older buildings that I felt should be preserved and was successful at it. And I actually was appointed to a regional government commission on a board that funds the restoration of these buildings. And I've been chairing that for 7 years now.
Great. Good for
Just
you.
going into it. So it's been tens of millions of dollars in project work, but it's great because it's artistic. And one of the things that I look at with particularly some of the older buildings, whether they're a known architect, which some of them are, and some of them are really, we know who the architect is, but he was never a famous, he or she, but mostly he. Um, but they communicate. There's something you see when you stand at that facade and you see a certain level of balance, and sometimes it's symmetrical, it's not. And even the choice of colors and materials and just the thickness of the pilasters, somebody agonized over that.
We could
And
do an entire hour on this. I'll tell you why. Because I used to live in Venice for a decade, and I became obsessed with architectural history and the reasons why why buildings work and some buildings don't. Functionality. I'm just as much in love with brutalism as I am with classicism. So, it's not about modernity or anything. It's just about the beauty of architecture. And one of the greatest books, as you probably know, is John Ruskin's The Stones of Venice, where he talks specifically about the dangers of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in terms of design. He was talking at that point about Baroque buildings and the Baroque design philosophy, destroying the beautiful elegance of, decades and centuries of stonemasonry and the beauty that came through the Middle Ages of that. And he was going, this bloody modern stuff, Baroque nonsense, and so I learned a lot of philosophical stuff through the study of architectural history. I think a lot of people could learn a lot of interesting stuff. Even though it appears to be quite dry on the surface, it's not at all.
but it absolutely does. I mean, one of the albums that I did in the 80s, Metropolitan Suite, was inspired.
Yeah.
It was inspired by an architectural study of New York in 1900. And that was inspirational, and it was sort of the growth of the beginning of the skyscraper era, the kind of New York that we know today. It was really finding itself at that point. It was a couple of years behind Chicago, which already started that, but they were kind of wiped off the map with their Great Fire in the 1870s, so they had clean slate. Which
We have so much stuff in common; it's unbelievable. I was involved in co-writing a theatrical treatment for a musical. Myself and Vince Clarke, a musical about Tesla. And so Tesla, of course, was responsible for inventing AC power, which enabled the rapid development.
There are so many things that Tesla's getting credit for that he wasn't. There are a couple of good sources. A fellow historian researcher of mine wrote kind of the definitive Tesla biography and about 10 years ago. He's an engineering professor, University of Virginia. And thus, I probably haven't.
I need to get this.
There it is.
Oh no, I bought that. Yes, yeah.
Bernard Carlson. So, go through there and see what the things that he did do that he doesn't get enough credit for, like continuous wave radio frequency transmission, which is the basis of all, even digital radio, and incredible stuff. But AC had been around way before him. It started in 1832.
Well,
And
How come he had the paint on it then?
He he's I've got 62 myself. You make some slight changes on things, it's patentable.
I see.
The ones that what he got was for the really important one was partly for a two-phase electric motor that worked off of AC.
Oh, I see.
Didn't last for very long because two-phase, he wasn't a very good physicist, so it wasn't very efficient. And there were better ones that were developed. The three-phase that we all use now,
Yeah.
kind of overtook that within about 10 years. Um, but he's a really interesting character. You know, the other big thing that I'm punching holes in a lot is the apparent or the internet meme of a battle between Edison and Tesla. And it never really happened for two reasons. One was that um, uh, we've got a lot of documentation of the birthday greetings they sent annually and Edison's uh, the Edison medal, which was presented to Tesla in 1917 or 1919, where Edison was present at that. And it was a very happy affair. So there wasn't any big battle on that. And the other was that Edison was committed to DC because they held the patents on most of that, although they had already licensed a number of developments from Siemens to use for what would have been an Edison AC system. But JP Morgan, who was underwriting most of the Edison money for the Edison Illuminating Company, he forced a merger with another company that was already an AC company, and Edison didn't want any part of it. So he was forced out of the electrical company by 1892. So Edison wasn't even part of it. Edison completely removed himself from that field. Actually, Morgan. So that
I'm going to rewrite my stage treatment.
I'll send you there. I just found a really wonderful, it's a woman who is like a physicist, researcher, historian, who in 15-minute YouTube video with some clever graphics kind of sums the whole things up. But she's accurate. She's not pulling any punches. The reason that I know a lot about how all this works is that one of the other things that where I live, I'm very close to where the Edison laboratories were. And of course, this is a little triangle here in New Jersey. It's got Bell Laboratories, which is literally within sight of my house. The Edison laboratories, which are about 35 minutes away. And then prior to that was another one called Speedwell. And that's where Alfred Vail invented the modern electromagnetic telegraph based on some concepts that Samuel Morse had that he picked up actually from in France and England when he was over in the 1830s. And so the one gave rise, the Vail development gave rise to the Western Union Company here, which is what brought Edison a generation later to, because he wasn't from around here. He was from out in the Midwest. He came east because of the access to capital, and there was already an artisan business building devices for stock tickers and telegraph and all that. So Edison jumped into that. And then not all that long later, they overlapped. Bell Labs, Edison was still alive, they built. And there's actually parallels between the laboratory where the transistor and Telstar and talking movies and all of that was developed. And the Edison, one of the reasons Bell Labs existed is because the Edison labs were a for-hire facility, and they did R&D research for other companies. And the Bell Telephone Company, AT&T, farmed out a lot of the carbon research on things like microphones and transmitters. They're spending way too much money over at Edison, so they ended up starting what became Bell Labs in order to move it in-house.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
It's
This all new to me. It's amazing though. Thank you for sharing all that.
Right.
You actually come from the place where all this stuff happened. So, give me one more thing about Tesla. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to mention that when after Bob Moog died and his daughter Michelle, who is running the Bob Moog Foundation and the collections for Bob Moog, I brought Michelle to meet with the staff at Edison about how the archives collection nuts and bolts work, and collections management, and all the papers and all of that. And the Bob Moog Foundation is off to a fabulous start at this point.
Really? Wow. One more question about Tesla. I want your opinion on this. His idea of the free to transmit electricity idea, was that ever a feasible concept? I mean, the idea of
Nope, because his understanding of physics predated Niels Bohr, Einstein, the Curies, this what's now called the Standard Model, which was still tweaking a bit, but it was a different model that was popular in the 1860s, and it was based on the energy that could be in the ether. There are a lot of things that proved out to not be the way things actually are. There was a good hypothesis based on what they knew from the early electromagnetic experiments in the 1830s and 40s.
right.
But he pegged everything on that, and that's why he wasn't able to get any of it to really work. If you throw enough power at it, you can transmit some degree. The Colorado Springs experiments show.
Yeah.
And he took basically the whole power of the Telluride Basin area, I think, or Colorado.
And he
Springs.
broke it down, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and he got one light bulb to light, screwed into the ground about 100 feet away. But it wasn't a practical thing. He went to war the last 30 years of his life, and this again by the Tesla fans kind of bury this. But he felt that Einstein was completely wrong and off his rocker, and none of the basis of relativity or the conversion of matter E equals mc squared. He basically said it was just a lot of rubbish, and he was very vocal about it. If he had lived about another 18 months to see the Trinity explosion, it would have proved that Einstein was right. But he was absolutely vitriolic about writings. He gave an interview in Time magazine in the mid 1930s, which was just really cruel on Einstein. And I don't know whether, he was a very spiritual in his Eastern European Christianity. And guys like Edison were like nearly agnostic, close to atheist. And of course, as a Jewish refugee, Einstein was a very vocal voice in a completely different culture. There's an undertone of that in there too.
Is there?
And it's not blatant in things like the other one, but I've heard from secondary sources.
Well, I mean, anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And I don't know. I've never read anything of Tesla's that says that, but it's kind of the backhanded thing. There's a famous quote, which the Tesla fans use when Einstein was asked something. They asked him, "What does it feel like to be the smartest man in the world?" And he said, "I don't know. You'll have to ask Tesla." But that was dripping with sarcasm.
Mm-hmm. No, I see. Right.
A rebuttal. But the fanboys have picked it up and said, "See, even Einstein said he was the
right." Oh, I see. Yeah. Wow, we have really gone down some interesting rabbit holes.
Yeah. Well, I told you that in the email. I said there's a lot that I do. I mean, right now I'm with Edison. We're hiring a researcher. After I get off with you, I've got to do some follow-ups on that. We've got a PhD candidate coming in to research Mrs. Edison's role in women's development in the Victorian era. And
Interesting.
I've got some of the architectural work to do, and then I've got some surround sound things that I need to play with in the studio.
Right. So I need to tell you, I don't know if you know, but I've got a company called Illustrious, which I've had for 20 years. Again, myself and Vince Clark. And we've been doing ambisonic surround sound.
I was reading about that. Yeah, tell me more, please.
Large scale installations, basically. Well, every scale, but the largest we've done so far is we've done all the major squares in London, but we did the Millennium Bridge in London, which is 300 meters long by 20 meters, 10 meters wide or whatever. We did a huge square in the center of Mexico City in front of the Palazzo di Bears Artes, which is like 150 meters square by 30 meters high, and it's but you obviously know about ambisonics and different levels, and so we designed a front end so it's usable for musicians. It's called 3D Audioscape, and we've been using it for 20 years, and we've done like 70 major things around 70 major installations around the world, including several things in New York actually. And I'm still creating. So, well, I'm just going to Venice actually, as I mentioned earlier, to do a big installation at a Palazzo on the Grand Canal next week as part of the Venice Art Biennale. And we continue to do. I'm fascinated with immersive sound, and I know that we've got Dolby Atmos now.
You see that as a way of jumping on, maybe not for these installations, but
not for me, because I did some consultancy for them, for which I didn't get paid, by the way. I have to drop that in every time. And I went to their research facility and tried it out and compared our system to their system, and they freely admitted that ours sounded better. So Dolby Atmos is a solution, is good in certain circumstances where it's completely controlled. Like it's designed to be a bolt-on for existing surround sound in cinema. It's an economic thing, right? So it's never going to be as good as something that's designed from scratch to sound like you're immersed in a real environment. But if you were ever interested, we could take this conversation offline, and I'd very happily discuss with you doing some stuff in ambisonics at some point, because
I'd be very interested in that, because what I've been doing, to take it back to square one with my Synergy albums, I've been having the most.
We're not really talked about those. This is the major part of his career, right? So I'm sorry about it.
Well, it was an anchor point, but it's everything else radiates out from that. So both for just the eventual deterioration of the tapes, I wanted to get everything, in 2496 multi-track packages, and the last batch are in right now, getting transferred, baked, and lubricated, and cleaned, and demolded, and all of that. They should be back within the next couple of weeks or months. And then the whole idea was to go back and do initially, when I first started this, I thought, well, just 5.1 surround. I actually came in my career at the tail end of the quad era, so I have 4-track discrete mixes in some of the stuff. But and
the beauty of our system is that you can have 16 discrete sound sources appearing to be real, moving around in 3 dimensions at 25 frames a second, and it's all integrated with logic, and it just runs on MIDI controller values basically. So and also it can be rendered out into full ambisonic 3 dimensions, or into any format you want, because you just tell it where the speakers are and it just reconfigures. So anyway, that's a separate conversation, but we need to continue this.
You and I will continue this discussion. The larger discussion, but we should go back to your question sheet. Card.
Sorry, yes. I keep getting distracted. I just want to talk to you about Synergy and how important it's been for you from the start. As you say, a continuous thread that runs through your career. You've got all this amazing experience with other artists and serving their needs, but it seems to me this is your passion project, right?
It kind of is. I mean, it was the only project. The session work was kind of an accident that came out of that while I was doing the first.
Right.
I mean, the real quick story is that I had a band. We had a development deal, and I thought I was going to follow the Rick Wakeman model, which is
right.
You get when the band gets big, you as the keyboardist get an opportunity to do a solo album. And I thought, well, I'll do that. Well, the band had a development deal. We didn't get picked up right away. People started leaving, getting antsy, and eventually they threw me out of the band because they didn't think I was as good as the rest of them, which may have actually been the case. I didn't practice as hard. I was busy learning the ropes of the publishing industry and doing other things. Regardless, I managed to land the deal. And it was an opportunity to do the first Synergy album with one of the labels that had passed on the band. And that worked out just great. Well, while I was in the studio doing the recordings, I had 12-hour blocks of time. Other artists were coming in for the other blocks, and they'd see all this weird stuff, which they weren't that familiar with, and play them a little bit. And they go, "Oh, could you do that on mine?" So the very first thing I did, and again, this was completely out of my genre, it was the Wendy Carlos world. It was the progressive rock, Mellotron, and Moog world. And these were R&B acts from inner cities. And they loved bass sound. So I ended up doing Moog bass things that were unheard of. None of these acts at the beginning turned into anybody. They were all, working towards something. But it gave me experience, and it really opened my eyes, because I was a little bit too blinded to the kind of London to New York axis of a particular genre. And this way, I learned a whole different vocabulary and producers, and I started finding out where the beat and the pocket was, and and then starting to realize, oh, gee, some of my favorite Brit bands don't really do that very well, do they? But to a Motown record, they have it nailed. So, it was very educational for me, and it later helped a lot on some of the Peter Gabriel things, where Peter was looking to have a bit more, it wasn't going to be a funky groove, but we wanted to, have some knowledge of that's baked in.
He had to. I've always said that Peter Gabriel is innately soulful and knows. Well, we'll call it the groove or funk, or funk is too loaded a word, but syncopation. He understands all that stuff. It comes across to me as not as a technical musician, but as a feel musician. I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I grew up with a lot of soul music, growing up in Sheffield, a lot of Northern soul and kind of rare Motown records and all that stuff. And it definitely informed the way that I created stuff. And people go, "Oh, but it's Then in like the early 80s, the real kind of, this is what electronic music is. It's all going to be like Kraftwerk and very regular and very ordered. And I don't believe that's the best way of looking at it. I was very impressed with your album Chords, where you were experimenting with guitar synths, right?
Right. And that
I had the feel of that.
The guitar player from my the band that didn't get signed, he was the one that executed a lot of that. And it took a little bit of the keyboard rigidity out of it.
That's it.
Which was important. It was a little bendier and slidier. And that was a guy named Russ Ham, who designed that guitar synth, who was a friend of Wendy Carlos's. In fact, Russell was the one who introduced me and Wendy.
Wow. Have you tried, let's just talk about guitar synths for a sec, because it's a thing that's fascinated me over the years. We used them quite a lot in the early times of Heaven 17, but then we didn't use them for a long while. And it seemed to me that the technology didn't really develop very much over the decades. And I'm not really sure where we're at with guitar synths at the moment. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not really sure either. I mean, I thought what worked on Chords was that it wasn't really being used as a guitar. It was an alternating controller, and it brought another personality, another music personality, in which I think was a nice change for a Synergy album. But I'm just not sure that a lot of the things, bigger orchestral sounds or, more spectral sounding things that can be done with a guitar synth generally can be done with a keyboard synth, or they could be done if you just draw them on the screen. So I'm not sure that the controller is the most important part of it. And I was intrigued by that, the one that Russell Ham had designed, and saw it as something worth exploring, and then never really went back to it either. So that might see
exactly. Why? I wonder why I didn't, and I wonder why you didn't. Because what I really like about it is the kind of slithering between notes, and those kind of, human expressionistic things that are hard to achieve by programming. If somebody nailed that, it would still work for me. I mean, I think
I
I've tried
think it's
with
up to
controllers and all that stuff, and that works as well, but it's all a bit approximate.
I think it's up to the musician that's playing the guitar, and I run into the same thing with keyboardists, and again in the progressive rock community, the current version of it, which is almost more of a fusion community. But
Yeah.
both the guitarists and the keyboardists seem to be wedded to playing as many notes as rapidly as possible. Hair,
Yeah.
and it's exactly. There's a virtuosity that's involved in the mechanical skills, but I'm not sure it transmits much musically or emotionally, or it's not sustainable. Eventually, it just becomes
Yeah.
background.
Have you tried the the soft keyboard? I forget what it's called now. The one with the multiple controllers. And
I haven't. I've seen YouTube things. I've got a few friends that have been absolutely enamored of it, and it looked interesting. But in my own head, I mean, like as I had mentioned earlier, I never stayed with the piano lessons long enough to become truly virtuoso keyboardist. And certainly good enough for rock and roll and good enough to practice my ass off and do a classical concert now and again. But the controller's never been, or doing that hasn't been ever as important to me as what I can think up inside my head when I can hear where it's going.
I'm with you on that.
There's a lot of different ways to get that into a recorded version.
So we're coming to the end of this because it's just flown by. I mean, we could talk all day probably. Just want to talk to you about Bob Fripp because I've met him a few times. He's an all-time hero of mine. He's my favorite guitarist on earth, number one, in terms of the sounds he can create from his process. What's your view on all that? Because you work with him, right?
Yeah. It was funny. I was a Crimson fan, and had seen them a number of times before meeting him on the first day of the first Peter Gabriel solo album. And I was very excited about that. And Peter told me that he had only asked for 2 musicians to come in on that album, and that was me and Robert. So I was very flattered. And first thing I said to him was, because I'd heard Robert Fripp, I said, "What do you prefer?" He said, "It's Robert." So it was Robert from that point on. And we actually, Peter and Robert and I, didn't eat with the rest of the Bob Ezrin studio musicians. They were a little social clique of their own, kind of like the Wrecking Crew or something. These were his standard guys. Great people. I don't mean to say anything at all negative about it, but they're going to having long dinners at nice restaurants, and Peter and Robert being vegetarian, wouldn't have as much of a menu. So I wasn't then, and I'm still not now, a vegetarian, but I can more than get by with a vegetarian meal there and again. We would have much quieter dinners, and I got to know Robert, and Peter I was getting to know at that point. And we discussed, it was very much like us here today. We're discussing all different types of topics. It wasn't just the music. But I think what came into it that you obviously can see in Peter, and Robert is a little different in how he expresses it. They don't think like everybody else. No. It's not just being nonconformist for the sake of being nonconformist. It's just having a different creative outlook that expresses itself somewhat differently. And I've tried to allow that within myself too. But these guys were just the best people to talk to and to observe. And
I want to spend some time with Robert because I just really admire him. I just think he hangs out at some of these festivals. You know, we do summer festivals, and he turns up to morally support Toya, his wife, and he's just like all the younger people have no idea who he is, and he just wanders around with like his Mac on, and all this, and I'm going, you know what, Robert? And he goes, yeah, and his kind of West Country accent, and it totally unassuming, just a lovely, lovely person, I think.
Well, he spent a year when he was in the late 70s, when he spent time in New York around the time of Peter's second album. And he had taken a rental place and he was doing some Frippertronics avant-garde coffee house kind of things down in the Village. And he came out by that time. I was playing, this was just before working with Peter, band Nektar, which
Yeah, that's
was
right. Yeah.
now Mo Moore, Derek Moore was the bass player and kind of de facto leader. He's from your neck of the woods. He was from Doncaster.
Is he? Oh, South Yorkshire. Massive.
Yeah.
Respect.
So, and so the drummer too, the rhythm section. Ron Howden, not sure if he's Doncaster, but he's somewhere real nearby.
Right.
And anyway, we were sharing a house here in New Jersey, again, outside of New York, about an hour outside. And Robert came out to stay with us. And he didn't really know Nektar from anywhere, but Mo and Robert got on famously. They were different ends of the country, back home, and not completely unlike styles, but Nektar had, of course, done the pilgrimage to Germany, like so many bands deep in Spain.
I was reading about that. It's interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
But it was really interesting. So, there were a lot of interactions with Robert over the years. And of course, we did the first Gabriel tour. So it was not a very long one before he left. And then the next album. So we've had a lot of interactions. The Roaches.
I must ask you, have you seen the trailer for the King Crimson documentary?
Yes, I've seen it, but
that looks fucking hilarious. Excuse my language.
I was also Zoom interviewed for another documentary just about Robert that somebody's authorized.
Oh, okay.
Do it without permission. But,
oh, okay.
But anyway, Robert, I just found him to be a fascinating guy. He's very good at breaking into different ways of thinking, and of course, that's been, he and Eno had, quite a lot of that philosophical approach on that.
Yeah. I mean, what amazing creative nexus. I mean, the pop stuff and anyway. So, tell me about the Walt Disney theme. I know we're overrunning here. I hope I'm not disturbing you today. But it's just so fascinating, all this. Thank you so much. Tell me about the Walt Disney theme park, Tokyo Disney SeaWorld or something. Is it called?
Well, yeah, it was Tokyo Sea.
Sea.
Kind of lost track of what's happened. It's been 20 years with that, but the one of the Imagineering, which is the creative part of Disney, an electronic music artist named Russell Brower, who had been on one of the small labels through the same distributor that I was with, and I had a little bit of a hand in seeing that he had the opportunity to come into the label group. And he returned the favor later. His career as a solo musician on its own didn't quite pan out, but he ended up as kind of the artistic director for Disney, for some of the theme parks and the rides and things. So when they were doing this big one in Japan, he's asked me if I'd be interested in doing that. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Does it pay? And it's like, it's a typical Disney thing. It pays pretty well, but you give up all the rights. Yeah. Basically, working for
everything. Yeah.
So it didn't seem like that bad a deal anyway, considering what was going on. So I did that, and it was in the middle of doing the Tony Levin Band tour, and we actually had toured in Japan during that. Tony Levin Band being three of us: Tony, Jerry Murata, and myself, and then Jesse Gress from Todd Rundgren's band, being the Tony Levin Band. And so we had done well. We were Grammy nominated, made it almost, we got beaten out by Flaming Lips for Rock Instrumental of the Year, 2003 or something. But we got to go to the fancy ceremony and all that. Regardless, Russell was great and encouraging. He'd hired Tomita for a different village. There were several, kind of in the Disney style. They had them. Mine was kind of a whaling village, mid-19th century thematic. And he had done some of it. I'm trying to remember who else? There were a couple of different composers that they had brought in and handed off each of these villages, and
Okay.
that was it. But I had to do each piece of music in 3 synchronized styles. There was a kind of a laid back light version of it that would be heard in the restaurants and the indoor attractions, and then a kind of a medium level when you were wandering around the village itself on the walkways, and then on some of the amusement rides, intense version of the same thing. But
Oh,
wanted it so that if you're watching the ride go through its gyrations, synchronized with the music, and you were sitting in the restaurant sipping your iced tea, you heard the same music in this lighter form, but it's still
very
great.
good. Very good. Was that your idea?
No, this was part of the brief that they had
Wow.
come up with their engineering ride amusement people had figured all that out.
Wow.
all
Okay.
time.
So I think in the interest of time, we should get onto the stupid questions that I ask everybody at the end of each of these.
What's your
Int-
favorite sandwich?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. No, they're not so stupid. It's more of an insight into who you are, really. What's your favorite film?
Probably 2001: Space Odyssey.
I'd go with that. Favorite book?
That's a tough one, because there are so many broad, they're most reference books, and it could be one of those architecture books like New York 1900, or it could be one of the surveys of industry and technology. It's kind of a moving target.
Yeah.
So, if I had to say the one that had the most influence on me, it was probably the General Electric 1963 transistor manual and engineering, because I learned more from that I applied to creating art than just about anything else.
That is just such a great answer. That's the best answer of anybody. That's great. Top
Well,
mark.
actually, right here, I can show it.
Yeah, show it to me.
It should be on the bookshelf. Oh, come on. Here it is. Oh, I forgot. There's 2. This is the one that
That is
you can tell one it is, but it's just nothing but circuit diagrams. That actually replaced. This is the 1962 book.
Oh, I love the artwork.
It got, yeah, isn't that amazing? It got much more. But my grandfather, who I was telling you about, who was so influential, he had this, and when it was superseded by the new one, um, I couldn't wait for him to finish with the old one, with the new one, to become an old one. So I went and bought it, and I don't know if you can see, but the price was $2.
$2. I just think that's the best ever favorite book answer. Favorite TV show, old, new, box set, series.
Oh boy, it depends. If I would say if it was comedy, Faulty Towers, which probably puts me a little out of the typical American mainstream.
Yeah,
Uh,
fair enough. That's all I need. Who's your favorite composer or other musical artist?
it's again, there's a sort of a range. There's Stravinsky. I've been trying to decode,
I love Stravinsky. He's my favorite classical composer.
and then the one, and our cat has even named this George Gershwin, because he straddled the worlds that I've tried to do as well. And he was a wonderful pop careerist in the rock and roll of his era, and yet also taken seriously as a composer. And just the melding of the work that he did, the cultural, bringing in black music.
No,
There was so much to it, as well as the orchestral tradition that he was growing out of. So enormous respect there.
yeah, Stravinsky had some jazz influence in there as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think he's quite interesting. Okay. An epiphanal moment in your life.
You mean for a self-recognition or something?
Not necessarily, or you can interpret it how you wish. Maybe a fork in the road that just you took one path and it could have been another, or a light bulb moment.
Well, I think the light bulb one is we actually discussed. I think it was probably you probably find this with Americans musicians more than anywhere else, perhaps. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
It was it was just a defining moment, whether the ground had been prepared for that, whether it was because I was just the right age as a baby boomer after World War II. Not sure what it was, but no matter what, I was saying from that point forward, oh yes, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to do this and that. It was like, nah, I'm going in this.
No, I'm going to do rock and roll. Okay. Favorite visual or conceptual artist?
Well,
I'll let you have architect if you want.
yeah. Oh, well, if that's the case, I mean, lately it'd be Frank Gehry, because in a way, even though I like a lot of different styles of modernism or skyscrapers, he was kind of my architectural Stravinsky. It was
Right.
there's a lot to decode there.
There is.
But Frank Lloyd Wright would be up there with it as well, because again, there's I would have some of his.
I went to his house, of course, in Chicago, and not in Chicago, outside Chicago, and that was an interesting.
Park or one. I mean, there are a number. There are some of them around here, but I mean, things are so different. Man lived so long. If you look at the Prairie style houses from the 1880s, and then you look at the Guggenheim Museum in 1959,
Amazing.
quite a range.
He was denied. He put a proposal in to replace take an empty site on the Grand Canal in Venice, and he was denied. He was denied building it because they said it was too modern.
Yeah, I can see that. I could see how that would pop up. It depends on the review committee's attitude. If they want to hear in amber what Venice was, he's not the guy.
I saw the design. It was it might have fitted. It was anyway. Neither here nor there.
Better work in the Midwest and Did you ever get to Taliesin West, the one in Arizona?
No.
That was later in his life, where he had the architectural school.
Right.
He did an interesting thing, which reminded me very much of Robert Fripp, or vice versa.
Right.
That he had the architecture students come out there, and they paid to be there to be learning, and then they worked to build the to build what he was, his visions, which was a little like guitarcraft. The students came to learn, they came out, and then they ended up giving the tours. And the
interesting, yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of sculptors as well, and the Canova is my favorite sculptor, and he had a huge number of students who built the most fantastic crypt for him in one of the big churches in Venice, and it's like the most incredible. You've probably seen it. It's one.
I'm not connecting the name.
Yeah, in the Frari Church. That's where it is. Which of your own work are you most proud of?
It's usually whatever the current thing is, but if I have to go back over the Synergy catalog, I would say probably Chords consistently.
I thought maybe great.
Sweet. That was my run at Gershwin. And then in the other things, it's the Peter Gabriel catalog, I suppose. Some of the ones that are the biggest ones, the biggest hits, like Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart or something like that. I mean, I'm always hearing myself in the supermarket.
It's just amazing. You span completely popular music on a giant scale, right down to, on the other end of the scale is like beautiful artistic interpretations of your own kind of narratives and thoughts. I've got total respect for that. I'm hopefully a similar kind of person who treats popular music and shall we say more demanding music with equal weight, and I think that's an important lesson to be learned, really. Which all right, here's a good one. If you had an alternative career, if things had panned out differently, what do you think you might have been?
Well, it's probably some of the things related to what I'm doing. I mean, there's the historic preservation architecture, where actually I could probably hang out a shingle and do that as a consultant. and that, of course, the work in the museums, right? Edison for one, and then a few of the others like EMIAP, which is a museum that's forming up. I'm on the board of that. This my history studies and archives work and drawing threads and conclusions together on that. I could see a career in that. I mean, I'm working so closely with the National Park Service staff at Edison right now in these projects, even though I'm an unpaid volunteer. This is, essentially my charity work, but I could see turning that into a paid career. So, you've got that, you've got architecture, um, if it would be completely divorced, I could have just stayed in, musical engineering or instrument design or something like that.
Wow. I've
But there-
thought something. Next year, I'm doing a big project with RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects in the UK. And we're doing a 4-day event where we're examining 12 of the greatest buildings from the past, the present, and the future. In other words, some of the buildings haven't been built yet; they've just been planned. And I'm basically giving a building each. I'm curating it all, and I'm giving a building each to different artists to do an artistic interpretation of it. It might be music, it might be dance, it might be poetry, it might be whatever. And I'd love you to be involved in that if it's of interest, since you're such a fan of architecture.
Yeah.
There's no money in it, of course.
No, it's interesting. There's two things, of course. What time, how much time is available to me on that, and the other would be, can I come up with something? It's like,
Oh no, no. It's just it's really. I've done something similar before. As I put together a 1-day artist commune for a late night event at the exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery in London for Picasso portraits. And so I said to people, pick a Picasso portrait and do your interpretation of it in sound or however you want to do it. And that was pretty cool. And my biggest problem is trying to convince these really stuffy kind of organizations to believe in your artistic vision, and so it's really, I trust artists completely. This is the way I work as a producer. And anyway, so it would be a pleasure to have you involved if it was of any interest to you.
no, let's stay in touch on that, because if nothing else, I've been away from doing my own recordings for far too long, and I've got a lot of percolating ideas in various stages. One of those evolves into it, as long as it's in non-exclusive use for what you're doing, so that I
Oh no,
can
absolutely. I mean, imagine being taking a historical building and using that as an inspiration. You've already done it on one of your albums, so
Well, yeah, so Metropolitan Suite was sort of about the building of it, but you can hear in that opening, almost more Prokofiev
yeah.
part of it is, the building of the skyscrapers and the foundries and the iron workers. And
I'm
it's
thinking we were probably separated at birth. We've got so much in common here in terms of the way that we talk about things and how our kind of um, eclectic kind of approach to creativity. And you're involved in a lot of different organizations, and I constantly have to try and cut back on my activities as well, because I'm overcommitted a lot of the time.
definitely right. In fact, one of the points just off while we were in this, the Peter Gabriel band was always a little more focused on art than just music. I mean, in fact, one of the things when I used to tour with Nektar, if we'd have a day off, everybody was going, "Where's the bar?" That would be the first to find the bar. And I remember I was coming into Paris and one time on one of the Gabriel tours, and it was a day off. It was about to come up. It was like Rodin Museum.
Yes. Oh, that's great. That's a great museum.
But a very different attitude than a typical rock and roll band would find. And we actually, at one point on one of the tours, found that we were paralleling the New York City Ballet on tour. We were doing similar cities for longer engagements, and we were visiting each other, meeting up with the ballet dancers. They ended early. No, it is absolutely great. In fact, yeah, later, I mean, as an outgrowth of that, Tony Levin and one of the principal ballerinas have a daughter who's
You
now
can't not that at all. All right, I've got two final questions for you. One is, do you have any unfulfilled ambitions? I'm sure you have lots, like I do, but
Yeah, I can't think of. I mean, there's a lot. You get to this stage of life and you go, well, what are there any huge disappointments? And
right.
there haven't been. There have been so many things, that when I was much younger, going, oh, if I could just get into a recording studio for a day, my life would be fulfilled. And if I could only hear myself on the radio, or
Yeah.
if I could only appear on television. Well, many, many of those things have happened.
Yeah.
So there's not too much, I was thinking about at one recently, just because these people popping into space for 5 minutes, and thought, do I want to do that? And part of me is going, no, that's kind of
I used to want that, but now I know the reality of it. I'm going, and Richard Branson wants to, and now I can't be doing it now.
yeah. Well, so some of the ones that were there when I was much younger,
Yeah.
they're kind of withered. No, I think it's these much more mundane things. Stay healthy, stay productive, stay happy.
I'm gonna have a T-shirt with that shit on. That's right. And finally, I ask everybody this question: what's your favorite synth?
Well, I think emotionally, even though I've been doing digital for 47 years from my first Bell Labs experience, I'm emotionally tied to the Moog modulars. They were just they're precision instruments. They were beautiful. They had their limits. We knew what the limits were, but they were broad enough. So I would stay with that. The Mini Moog is a nice subset of that.
Yeah. It's I'd love to have a Moog modular. I've got I'll show you. In fact, got a System 100, which is my first synth ever from the mid-70s. That I still use on a regular basis because it just sounds amazing. But yeah, I've never had a Moog ever.
Oh no,
I've got the virtual ones, of course, but
yeah. I mean, part of it too was Bob Moog, who I got to know very shortly after the first Synergy album came out. I was invited up, and because I just bought the instrument, the Mini Moog that I used on that, and some of the other instruments, I bought them retail, used them in the studio, and then got invited up to the factory. Met a lot of people who I'm still friends with, and some at EMIAP, some at the Bob Moog Foundation. And Bob was just great. And in fact, it was shortly after that first meeting with him, we hadn't met many times, when he was invited to be on the project at Bell Labs, but he was way upstate in New York, near Buffalo at that point, and I was within short driving distance here in New Jersey.
Right.
So he just suggested maybe that I would be interested, maybe they would be interested, and it's been an ongoing relationship. But don't get over there as much, but there are projects right now that are going on.
That's amazing. Right, we're gonna have to finish this at some point. So it's a good enough point as any. Thank you so much for your time and your candor and your just creativity. And I love your stuff. It's incredible. Your collaborations are incredible. But most of all, I like your, Renaissance man attitude towards everything. I'd like to think that I can aspire to that. So I might even split this into 2 episodes because it's gone on for long enough. So
whatever you feel works best, but we will follow up. I'll be emailing.
100%. I want to help you out with some of the immersive sound stuff and at least show you what it's capable of. Yeah.
It is. I mean, I started out with some of the quad things, as I mentioned, and of course, over at Bell in the anechoic chamber, one of the, great experiences was listening to some of the multi-speaker arrays that were being experimented with. They're still doing some of that kind of work over there right now.
Incredible.
In conjunction with Columbia.
You have a great day, and we will speak offline very soon. Thank you so much.
You have a good evening. Talk soon. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
That's